Artificial intelligence is the ability to create transparency. Instead of humans using their human thinking, which always will include bias, true artificial intelligence will create transparency. The best example that came out this year came from the Middle East war, and it's the A-10 Warthog. And basically, on the battlefield, the actual battlefield, this A-10 Warthog, and you can see it from the picture on the bottom there. Number one, it can take a lot of punishment from contestants' fire, but it had such tremendous firepower. So the A-10 Warthog has been one of the major pieces in the success of supporting the ground troops. And I even found the question here on what are we talking about? We're talking about a piece of equipment that is very effective in a contested environment. A contested environment it's under fire. As good as it is, and so some people thought there was no way to contest the A-10 Warthog. It's still in a contested environment, or there is somebody on an opposing side that in some way could actually cause the A-10 Warthog to fail. They're in, quote, a contested environment, or there is another contestant there in either a game or a war or on an opposing side. That is what we call a contested environment. Well, what's the problem with this? The problem with this is they now know that in the future, it's not going to be a contested environment. And therefore, the requirements on the A-10 Warthog or any other technology will be totally different. Well, everyone's in this same problem because here we have the Israeli Barak tank that has recently been out on the battlefield. And this tank actually ties in or has access to every information system on the battlefield. It took 5 to 10 years to develop. Very high cost. But who is the king of the uncontested environment? This is the king. What are the ramifications here? The ramifications of an uncontested environment is, number one, if somebody has a very expensive piece of equipment that took years to develop, in the uncontested environment, you have mechanisms that people with very little expertise can get up and running. The key in an uncontested environment is the cost to launch one of these participants or piece of equipment or systems is very low. And in an uncontested environment, the person who's actually controlling a system or a piece of machinery or whatever it is, number one, doesn't need the same level of expertise. And number two, the cost of these systems are very low. So people fear uncontested environments. It's when something can enter in, very low costs, and take over the environment. So, how can we define this once again? Let's look at this. It's when the cost of resources is very low. What's the objective? It's always to be effective and efficient. And the understanding to launch the system is very low. In other words, it goes into an environment and replaces other systems that may be there. In a truly uncontested environment, the system creates transparency. It's new vocabulary here, so if any of you have to mull this over for a while, please do. Well, what's the difference in how people look at AI? Well, AI is really, it's computer cognition, computer solving an issue. So therefore, any, quote, person who is a human is at risk. Why? Because now the new technology, which is the artificial intelligence, which it's so simple. All it is, it's a computer. So basically, all we need now is a computer and somebody feeding data into the computer. People say, how could that be? Well, you'll begin to see how that could be because we've actually tested the system out. Which means any data going into systems now, they have no connection of bias. And this really affects people's way they look at what they're doing or efficiency or effectiveness of the system. Now, the thing that we've learned for the last 10 years, we know that 90% of all project cost and time deviations is caused by the client side. So basically, why is this like so good? It's simply because that risk of deviations, surprises, problems should be gone. Yes. So, and we've been saying this for a long time. And as we have gone around and given presentations on this, immediately people recognize that you don't need a lot of people. This is key. So we're actually saying if somebody now runs the BVA 4.0, if you're using people, if you're using their expertise on the client side, you're doing something wrong. Efficiency, effectiveness. So what we're actually saying now is this system actually competing expert vendors to solve a problem. So we have now, basically, you can see right away the procurement system will be automated. And any data going into this computer system minimizes bias. So even if somebody has bias attached to some of these requirements, you'll fade away. So we have an automated procurement system, and we have a new project management approach. What's the new project management approach? Well, we've been saying it for a while. Management, direction, and control in this BVA 4.0 should go away. And the only, quote, person who should be overseeing and accountable now for the system that's being provided is an expert who sits with the expert vendor. And I know a lot of people say, well, we do things differently here. We're unique. Well, that's okay. All we're saying is, if what I'm saying is actually accurate and can be done, there are no unique client environments anymore. Because whatever uniqueness it has, it's connected to a previous bias. And we're assuming that that bias does not have all information. And that's what causes that client problems. So I was over and working on a project in the Middle East, and the procurement director, who was new, he said, one of the problems we see in your best value approach is that it doesn't recognize the unique abilities and constraints of our system that we're using. What he didn't understand is, by his definition of what he was saying, number one, he doesn't have enough expertise because there's no unique requirements anymore. What we're talking now is about an expert, and that expert takes total responsibility for knowing how a system should be run, what is optimal, what are constraints that need to be identified and done away with. That is a true expert. Now, once again, we can talk about these changes now, because over the next 4 presentations that I give, some of this we'll go into detail, and some of this we will actually discuss. So we'll do it in the format of Q&A, so people can ask more questions. So what are we talking about here? Just like that drone will be the king of an uncontested environment, we're actually talking about creating a procurement environment that's uncontested, which means there is no contesting what the expert can see and what the expert can provide. The visionary vendor expert now is truly the expert, and does not have to, quote, battle someone in that environment. So now we address artificial intelligence in a new way. Artificial intelligence, if what I said was true, now truly is the identification and the utilization of expertise. So how should this drastically reduce time and cost? Well, from the previous statement that I made, 90% of all, quote, project time and cost deviations was actually caused by client stakeholders. Documented very well. And the procurement costs is going to be reduced simply because it'll be much more efficient. And the human cognition activities will be reduced even further because we will have an expert actually working on the job. So we're looking at two ways of stating this. We're looking for efficiency and effectiveness. The key, now we have a system that will only take metric inputs, eliminate bias in the system because all you have is metrics to look at. And we're identifying and utilizing expertise. This also gets over another hurdle people have with best value because they think the cost is going to go up. The competitive costs will always go down. So really, the BVA system that is actually run through input of metrics and truly is an AI system. The only input it needs is metrics. And it's going to be, quote, turning the system once it identifies the expert to the expert who will take it from beginning to end, who may actually have to change other factors in the delivery of the service simply because they see that the existing system may be biased and too expensive and doing things that are not needed.